All right, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order now. It's 7 o'clock. We're calling the meeting to order of the Board of Education of Kaneland Community Unit District 302. And we'd like to inform all board meeting attendees that this meeting is being live streamed and archived for access at any time by our community members on the internet within 24 to 48 hours of the meeting's conclusion. And we will start with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And a roll call, please.
Mrs. Witt.
Here.
Mr. Carey.
Here.
Mr. Lawler.
Here.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Here.
Mr. Rivas.
Here.
Mrs. Barber.
Here.
And Mr. LePayton is absent.
Okay, and we are expecting Mr. LePayton, and with 6 members present, we do have a quorum. So do any board members have a request to move anything from the consent agenda to new business? Okay. Hearing no requests, we'll move on to the approval of the agenda tonight, and it looks like we're looking for a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
And for the record, Mr. LePayton is here. And then a roll call, please.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye. Motion carries 7-0. We come now to the board and superintendent salutes. I'll turn it over to Dr. Layden.
Yes, thank you. We have 4 students that we'd like to recognize. I think only one of them is in attendance tonight, but we have 4 students that, here, let me get my right. Mrs. Vanderlinder, who's the art teacher at the high school, unfortunately became ill at the end of the day and could not attend the board meeting, but did share some information that the 4 students that you'll see and hear about tonight, and one you'll get to meet, placed in the top 10 as part of the Regional Office of Education art program. So over the last 10 weeks, there were a number of submissions by our art students, and we do have some students that were recognized, and that artwork will be on display this Thursday night at Water Street Studios from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock in Batavia. So if you're available and you want to see a great representation of our students and their artwork, that will be on display Thursday night. So our students that we do have, and as I mentioned, one is here. So if you come up and join me in a second, we have Jacob Arend, Paige De La Brewer. Is that how you say your last name? How do you pronounce your name? I'm sorry, no. Paige's, do you know how to say Paige's last name? Okay, we'll just tell her we appreciate her artwork. Hallie Gensler and Jackson Clark, and I'll give Jacob yours. So Jacob, congratulations. Appreciate it. Mom, Dad, picture? Come on out. Jake. You stay for 1 second. Oh, you are here. Great. Stay for 1 second. We'll get a picture. Parents? One more. Congratulations. Jackson, glad you can make it. Congratulations. Congratulations. Right here. Show parents. There you go. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you. Very nice job.
Congratulations. We're proud of all of you.
Yes.
Then one other item to note, on Friday we had the highlight to be able to go around to each of 4 of our schools to highlight our Educator of the Year nominees. And those nominees are, from the classroom elementary teacher is Katie Riley from KBK, classroom middle school educator Christy Kukovic here at the high school, classroom high school educator Rachel Giles at the high school, early career educator Kyle Alleman from here at Harder, educational support staff personnel Mona Fergus at Shields, and student support personnel also here at Harder Denise Michaels. So they were recognized and surprised. We go around. Thank you, Shauna, could attend a few of those. Able to surprise them share our appreciation. And then later on, I think it's May 4th, Friday, May 4th, is the annual Educator of the Year banquet held at the Q Center in St. Charles, where all of the county districts or county school districts are represented and all of the teachers are there. So it's really a great night. So if you can make it, more information will be coming out later. But those are our 2 salutes for tonight.
And where can people go to find out where to send the letters for the, do you know?
We'll send that out. We sent
Okay.
it out initially. We do have that information here, letters of support, who to send it to. We'll make sure we send that out district-wide.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome. Those are the 2 that I had.
Okay. Dr. Fuchs? I have a quick one. The Scholastic Bowl team won conference this weekend, so I'm sure we'll be seeing them with the larger group later on in the season. So does any other board members have anything? I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. This is the first opportunity for public comment. There are normally 2 opportunities for public comment in a meeting. Tonight there are 3. There's one at the beginning of the meeting, one at the end, and those are for general comments. And then there's one in new business because we are doing the tax levy public hearing. So that one would be specifically comments on the tax levy. So if you choose to speak, we ask that you stand, state your name and village of residence or your association with us for the record, and limit your comments to 3 minutes or less so that all who wish to speak may do so. And we request that you seek a private appointment to discuss matters concerning individual students or staff members. The rules being stated, the floor is now open for public comment. Are there any public comments? Okay, hearing none, I will close the floor to public comment. And I did want to say that anybody that was here for the salutes that doesn't want to stay for the whole meeting, it's perfectly fine if you guys want to go. Yeah,
Congratulations again, though.
Thank you. Thanks. Forgot to say that. Okay, so tonight's consent agenda contains the following action items. The approval of the parameters for accounts payable and payroll for December 2017. The approval of the treasurer's report for November 2017. The approval of the minutes of the November 27th, 2017 regular meeting. The approval of resignations and employment of staff. The approval of destruction of audio recordings from executive sessions from May 2016. The approval of tax abatement for Build America bonds. The approval of RFP timeline for auditor selection. The approval of the paraprofessional program aid at Kaneland McDowell Elementary, and the following informational item, the student suspension data report. That being stated, we're looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
And a roll call when you're ready, please.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. Okay, and now we move on to new business. The first item is the public hearing and the approval of the 2017 tax levy. Get to the right place here. Okay, so we're going to open the public hearing at 7:10. This is the public hearing for the tax levy for Kaneland Community Unit School District 302. And Dr. Fuchs will give us a brief overview.
Sure. The Board of Education began the process of the tax levy at the second meeting in October, where you received all of the information. And at the first meeting in November, the board approved the tentative levy. I've not made any changes to the final levy from the tentative levy, so everything that we talked about and discussed is still the same. If you will recall, the levy amount is $45,600,000. We have bond and interest at $11,368,020 for a total levy at $56,968,020. The operating levy represents a 4.99% increase. However, we do not expect that we will receive that amount of money. We expect that we will receive about 2.8% more than last year. so only about 2.8% more. The CPI is 2.1. The rest of that increase is due to or a result of the new property in the district. With that being said, the tax levy that you will approve tonight is going to provide the programs, services, operating costs, and other expenditures in the 2018-19 school year.
Okay, so now at this time, we will entertain public comments on the tax levy. Are there any public comments on the tax levy? Okay, hearing none, I will close the floor to public comment, and it is 7:11 or so, and I will close the public hearing. Now, board members, if you have questions or comments, we can do that prior to a vote.
Just to restate, I guess, even though we're asking for 5%, we're limited by law to inflation plus, or CPI plus new growth. So it doesn't really matter what we ask for, it's what we're going to end up receiving is based on. Thank you.
Dr. Fuchs, just to remind me, how does this affect the average homeowner? We had a table at one point that had that?
Just a minute, I don't have that handy. 1 second, I brought it with, hopefully.
I know it's nominal, that's why.
Of course, that's nominal to one person, maybe.
Maybe someone else.
So if you have a home with an assessed value of about $300,000 and you assume that the value of that home increased 4%, your increase from this levy would be about $112.
Right, that's what I thought. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Fuchs.
Other comments, questions from board members? Okay, if there are none, then we're looking for a motion that the Board of Education approves the 2017 tax levy for Kaneland District 302 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Barber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. And I believe we have some additional signatures tonight because of the tax levy.
A few.
We'll have to, everyone will have to sign. Is that correct?
Is this an everyone night, or is this just a you night?
I think it's just you and
Okay.
Gail.
Just, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just the two of you.
Okay,
It's the budget that's everybody. Yeah, it's just the two of you.
Okay.
Thank you.
thank you.
Yep.
So we will move on now then to item J2, which is the PMA financial projections presentation.
Okay. So if you'll recall, as a part of the budgeting process, one of the first steps is to finish the audit from last year, because then we take that audit and we put it into the financial software that will help us to determine what our financial projections are for the next 5 years. If you'll recall, we approved our audit at the last board meeting, and so this board meeting then I've prepared, with the help of Mike Francis from PMA, our financial projections. So I'm going to stand up and get our slides ready to go. But I wanted to mention to you that this will probably be the last time that Mr. Francis will actually be at the board meeting. We're going to start the transition of, I'll be doing most of the presentation tonight, and then in the future, the whole presentation. However, we will still use the tool, the financial 5Cast software, and we'll still have Mr. Francis's hours that I will consult with him. So he will have that second set of eyes and expertise on all assumptions. If you'll also remember, the assumptions that we all talked about over 3 board meetings, first we did revenues, then we did expenditures, then we did fund balance, those assumptions have been used in this model. So once we take a look at tonight, there are a lot of things that you could say, well, what if? And I can go back and prepare those scenarios and give you answers to those questions. So with that being said, Mike, I'll have you stand here and I'll go over there. We've got to remember to use the microphone, and I think I probably just stepped away from it.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Francis. I'm the Senior Analytics Advisor with Forecast 5 Analytics in Naperville. And I was introduced as PMA, and it's typical because Forecast 5 and PMA, Forecast 5 was a spinoff company from PMA. We're sister companies. We work in the same building, but actually I'm now an employee of Forecast 5. I've been working with the school district for almost 10 years doing the financial projections, and most of that was with PMA Financial Network. But there is a separate company now. And so 2 years ago, we developed a different software platform called 5Cast. And so in the past, Julianne talked about this being a little bit different. Our previous software tool required me really to do a lot of the input and the financial projections, where I was working with Julianne still, your data, working with Julianne, but I was doing the projections and I would present the projections. The new tool really puts the power back into the user's hands. So even though I'm still involved, and I've talked to Julianne quite a bit over the last few weeks, still collecting the district's data, we now build a tool for our clients, and our clients actually build their own financial projections, again, with our guidance. So I've gone over a number of things with Julianne, and so I'm just going to really introduce the tool to you, and then it will help Julianne answer any questions throughout the process. So our new tool is called 5Cast. And it does the same thing as our old tool, which was called the FPP, or the Financial Planning Program, where you could develop multiple scenarios and what-if analysis. It's a 5-year plan that looks out, where have you been historically, where are you at today, and where potentially are you going on with your financial projections based on a series of assumptions that Julianne's going to go over in a few minutes. One of the differences between the old program and the new program is the old program was built on a much more higher level basis in terms of rolled up level of detail at the state, what we call the state budget form, or your annual financial report level of detail. The new program actually goes down to the general ledger. So every single account number, both on the revenue side and on the expenditure side, is built into the program. And because we go down to that level of detail, Julianne can put assumptions in it at any single, down to any single account number, and become much more specific in those financial projections. One more thing, Julianne, you did pass the levy. And that levy is actually built into this model already. In anticipation of that vote, it gets that detailed. The levy that you passed and all the previous extensions are all built into that. And that CPI, the tax cap law, which was mentioned, which is limits you to the CPI, plus that new growth, property tax revenue is forecast in our model with all of those different formulas, as well as all the different other data elements that we have listed here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julianne, and we've got about 10 slides, and I'll be happy to answer any other questions with that as I helped her do this. But Julianne?
Thank you. First of all, I think it's my fault that it said PMA at the beginning, because that's what I put on the agenda. So sorry about that, Madam President. I keep forgetting it is Forecast 5, so because I began with PMA. So anyway, thank you for helping with the transition. Our first slide that we're going to talk about is the budget, or the revenue. So this is our FY18 budget. That's the current year, the 17-18 budget. And this shows that approximately 73.4% of our revenue for the district comes from property taxes. We have about 5% of other local revenue. That 5% is made up of student fees, athletic fees, lunch fees, all of the other local money that we take in. If you take a peek then, we've got general state aid and other state revenue. The general state aid this year is a little bit higher. The reason why is because they've rolled some of the other categorical grants into the general state aid, which is nice because then we don't have to worry about whether or not we're going to get that money, because they've made the, and we're going to transition in a little bit from using the language general state aid into the evidence-based funding model. This year it's pretty much being called both. The other state revenue then would be your transportation reimbursement for regular ed kids and your special ed students. Our federal revenue is about 2.5% of our entire budget, and it hasn't changed much throughout the years. I think the highest it's been is probably 3%, and the lowest is about 2.5%. It kind of goes in between, depending on how much other state and local monies we have. So this is the first assumption that is built into the model, and it's on the CPI. If you'll recall with the PTEL law, that's the Property Tax Extension Limitation Law, otherwise known as the tax cap. The CPI is what the governmental body or the school district is limited, I think, Ryan, you said it very well, by growing at each year. It's either CPI or 5%, whichever is less. So this year, in 2017, we know that the CPI is 2.1%. If you'll recall, in the past, we've used the 1.5% going forward, but with our CPI, we've taken a rolling average of about 10 years, and we bumped it up. It was going to be 1.75, but the software made it into the 1.70. You can see that, and so I left it at that decimal of 1.7. It's pretty close to what the average is, and it just gives us a baseline for that data. The next page, or the next slide, has the EAV growth. 2017 is still a projection. By the way, on both of these slides, the darker colored bars are actuals, the lighter colored bars are projections. The reason why 2017 is listed as a projected number, if you'll recall, the levy that you passed tonight was built on assumptions or estimates. We won't know what our final EAV is until March or April. And that's why, Ryan, that's another reason why we levied 4.99%, but we only expect 2.86%, is because we levy a little bit more to make sure that we haven't under-levied for what we need to provide for the students. So then moving forward after the 5.7, you'll see that the estimate or the projection that we're using is 5.5 million. This is what we talked about at our, I don't know if it was our last 2 meetings ago, I think is when I did the final, hey guys, I need some numbers here. This is what we landed at, was 5.5. So if you take a peek at the next slide, you can see what this is. This is called revenue sensitivity. And so, say for example, we've projected out that CPI at 1.7, but say for example it comes in at 2.7, 1% higher. What does that mean to us? That means that we would get an additional $440,000 or potentially have access to that money if you levy for the full amount. Additionally, we've put in the 1.7. What if it comes in at 0.7? Then we would see about $440,000 less than what you would have seen with what's in the model. Similarly, new property, for every $1 million in new property, which we're estimating about $5.5 million, for every $1 million that it either goes up or down, it's approximately $57,000, either additional or less, depending on which way it heads. So those numbers are helpful because as you watch throughout the year of are things growing, how's the economy doing, you can get a better sense of which way we may be headed and how much. In the model then, our other local revenue, we get corporate personal property replacement taxes. We really don't get that much. It's about $244,000 a year. It goes up and down also with the economy. It hasn't gone up recently. It's only kind of come down a little bit. It very well may go back up a little bit, but not significantly. So because it doesn't have a significant impact, we typically and have always projected that at the same level as the current budget. And then when we do the budget in the fall or in September, once the Illinois Department of Revenue comes out with estimates on the CPPRT, usually about the end of July, beginning of August, once we know that number, we plug it in and put it in our budget, and then that budget number then comes back into the model the following year. All other local revenue at this point is being projected at the current amounts. If we make changes, significant changes, I can always go back in and put in a number and add it and then project it out. But right now, if you'll recall, last year the FAC recommended and the board approved a 3-year school fee plan. And so we just talked about it at last month's FAC meeting. The FAC is recommending that we stick to the plan and not increase or decrease school fees at this point. So if the board agrees with that, well, then this would be about right. The thing that might make it change just a little bit might be if our enrollment continues to decrease, we might see a little less in fees. Or if our enrollment increased, you might see a little bit more. But again, fees, if you'll remember from that first revenue chart, that local fee only makes up about 5%. And part of that are your athletic fees and your food service fees. And so that registration fee is pretty insignificant to the whole budget. But nonetheless, it does help with the budget because it helps to offset some costs for the things that we charge fees for. So, with regard to the state funding then, this is always a good guess. At this point, the state passed the evidence-based funding model in August or September. Which one was it? Late August, was it? Because it was too late for me to change everything for the budget, so I left them in their categories. But in this model now, I've double-checked and rechecked and had Mike look at it with me, that we put the money in the right places for what we are expecting. So with the evidence-based funding model, our base funding, which is what we know today, is at $6.671 million. That includes last year's general state aid, because there was a hold harmless clause in the legislation. And then these are the 4 programs that they added to this. It includes the ELL money, special ed personnel, special ed funding for children with special needs, and special ed summer school. All of those dollars are now included in that 6.671 number. Please know that last year, this money was the reimbursements and the mandated categoricals that we got late and or not at all until this year. So for us to have this money included in the EBF, the evidence-based funding, that's a good thing. We still have other mandated categoricals that are out there that the state hasn't paid us yet for this year. They're currently 1 payment behind for this year, because they come in 4 quarters, and coming up here at the end of the month, they're going to be 2 payments behind. However, we did hear from the comptroller in November, I think, and she thought we would get both of those payments before the end of the calendar year. But please remember that the state of Illinois had to sell bonds or borrow money, $6 billion, in order to make last year's payments. And so we'll just really need to wait and see if we get that money before we consider it done. Ryan?
ELL?
Thank you. That is our English language learners. So students that are learning to speak English because their native language is something other than English. So we are projecting that evidence-based funding at the base model. Please know that we believe we're in Tier 2 for this legislation. We also believe that if there's any extra money, Tier 2 should get some. But we don't know how much, and we don't know when. Once we know that information, we can put that into the model very quickly and easily, and then it will affect the year's projections, just like anything else that we would do a what-if scenario on. So if I hear that we're going to get something, I'll definitely model it, but right now I have no idea what it might be. Other state categorical grants, we are projecting at their current levels. They tend not to change too much each year, and so we've always projected those at the same because, again, they don't change too much. The federal revenue, we've projected it at the current levels, except I did make two changes. I added more money in food service, $55,000, because when we did the budget, I didn't have last year's finals, and I rechecked them after everything came back in, because there's a delay from the feds for the middle school who is still on the school lunch program. So after June, we submit our reimbursement, and then they pay us. And so I added that in because that's more closer to what the actual was for last year. And you have more kids in the middle school this year because you've got your biggest class now at the 6th grade level. So I feel pretty safe about that. Additionally, I adjusted the IDEA money. That is the grant for students with special needs that Fran oversees. I added, $15,000 in food service and $40,000 to IDEA. I think I said 50 something in food service, but it's broken down 15 in food service, 40 to IDEA. The reason why, again, I looked back at the actuals for last year for IDEA, and sometimes they will distribute leftover monies, and then you get a little bit more than you thought you were going to get at the beginning. And when that happens, then I can add that because chances are good it will fall into place for this year. Sometimes, too, we don't know our exact numbers when we do the final budget, so I'm feeling pretty comfortable that we can project those at these levels. And Mike agreed with that after looking at last year's numbers. That's pretty much the revenues and the revenue assumptions. Let me pause for a moment and see if board members have any questions on revenues.
Are we still missing one payment from the state from last year?
Last year, they're now caught up. We're waiting for this year's September 30th payment. And by the way, the evidence-based funding, this general state aid number, they have been paying that on time and consistently, just like they've always prioritized general state aid. So it's the mandated categoricals that are running behind, which has been typical as well. For us, last year that was about $1.2 million per payment. And so now it's a little bit less because you don't have these four things included.
So is this year going to show, well, we'll get there at the end. If it's on cash or accrual, is it going to be show 1.2 more this year than we would expect on a typical year?
Yep. So our cash is going to show the two payments plus whatever we get, but the accrual only from last year only showed one because we got one in August, which was within the 60 days of the audit. The other one came after that, so you've got one accrued to last year and one on this year. So your cash is going to be different than your accrual by about $1.2 million. Are there any other questions on the revenues?
Is there any discussion, just quickly, we don't need to go into this too deeply, but about where that additional revenue would come from? I mean, are there ideas in the legislature or whatever to get that additional money for like the tier 2?
Go ahead. Yeah.
The amount of the evidence-based funding is going to be determined during the general assembly when they meet in the spring and they develop a budget for next year. And so this year there was $350 million added. What the alliance between the School Board Association, the school business officials, and the school administrators are hoping that there would be an additional 350 or so added to that, to the pot of funding for schools on an annual basis, but there's no guarantee. If there is, then a tier 2 school district like yourself, where we don't even know the final results yet because State Board of Education is still kind of ironing all that out. But based on estimates, you would be a tier 2 school district. Tier 1 would get access to some of that money first. But then tier 2 would also get some additional funds. So it's really depends on appropriation. You probably won't know about spring at the earliest, but most likely not till next summer, whether there will be any additional dollars. The good news is, though, that hopefully you've set a kind of like a hold harmless base at that 6.6 million. So you can, it's much more likely to count on that in this model than it was the old GSA model, which could have had what they used to do was that proration. Even though they could still prorate this evidence-based model, I think politically it's going to be much harder for them to do that.
Okay, thanks.
So Julian, about how much are the other state categoricals, did you say?
Yep, just a second. Let me take a peek here. So, 1.2, 1.3, 1. Call it probably about, it'd be 800,000, give or take, per payment.
And then 4.
Yeah.
3.2.
Pardon?
3.2 a year? You said core.
Other questions on revenues? All right, let's carry on to expenditures. All right, again, this is a pie chart of our expenditures for this year's budget, because that's our starting point. Typically, salaries 59.2%, with benefits 13%. So that makes up about the same proportion as our local property taxes, give or take. Purchase services, 12.3% is our next biggest piece of the pie. That contains our custodial contract, so that's the biggest piece of those purchase services. Supplies and materials, 6%. Other objects, just for those of you who are curious, that typically represents tuition. So that might be our Fox Valley tuition or our tuition to Mid-Valley Special Education Cooperative. Our total operating budget this year is $58.4 million, estimated. 58.4 or 58,375. All right, then we build our assumptions for our estimates. All right, if you'll recall, we do not have any known salary amounts for FY19 and beyond. So we're going to begin negotiating with SPEAK this spring. And the KEA has a formula that's still undetermined because we want to wait and see what we're going to get with the evidence-based funding. So at this point, there are no known salaries for next year and beyond. So in the model then, we do not forecast any. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But here's what you can know. If you took all of our salaries in the district and gave everybody a 1% raise, so for every 1%, it's about $345,000. We do put in the model $100,000 for teacher lane movement. That's for teachers who get more education and they move, say, from a bachelor's degree to a master's degree. Every year I do the math to see how close I am to that 100,000. Some years it comes in higher, some years it comes in lower. That number works really well for us. Additionally, in this model, we've not made any changes to staffing. So if you'll recall, going into this year, we did reduce staff. That reduction is reflected. We know that our enrollments have been decreasing, and maybe there are some other opportunities for decreased FTEs. So one of the things that I can do is a what if we decrease by this, and put it into the model, and then I can run the results. At this point, keep it flat so we know where we're at. That's the idea at this point. Keep as much stability as you can so that as we make decisions, we can see what the impact or the effect of that decision is on our bottom line. Health benefits, if you'll recall, last year I had 4% in the model, and they came back a little higher than 5%. I did not like that. That was hard because we don't get that number till April or May, and then we're well into the budgeting process. So this year I bumped it back up to 5%. That's where it always was until last year when I thought, oh, we can get away with 4. We didn't get away with it, and it's back at 5. If it comes in better than 5, good for us. That's less work we have to do for reductions. If it comes in over 5, we'll have to do what we did this year and scramble looking for opportunities for additional savings or reductions. But we're going to stick with 5 for right now. Then what we can do is if it comes in high again, we can start using a bit higher, but maybe a multi-year average and see where we need to be. Purchase services, we keep everything pretty much the same except for these 2 things. We changed our custodial contract. We add 3% per year because we know that that's what's in the bid. So that's pretty normal, and that's what is in the bid. So we do that, put that right in the model. It's a large contract.
And what year are we in that contract?
Year 1 of either 3 or 5, depending on if we extend it after the 3rd year. Year 1. We just rebid it in the spring. We always build in 5% annually for special education tuition. That typically goes up. That tuition is built on a variety of things. That covers us if we get additional students. That covers us if transportation costs go up. That covers us if the tuition for Mid-Valley for a particular program goes up. It covers us for a variety of things and usually serves us very well. We did not model anything in here for PTEL, but I did run, or with Mike, we ran what if taxes were frozen for 2 years. I'll show you that in a minute. If TRS gets pushed onto the district, it would cost us an additional $274,000 per 1%. So again, that's not in the model. It's just an FYI so that the board is aware if you hear things coming down from the state, what that looks like for us. The model includes all known retirements. So that's not something that you can say, oh, well, we have this amount of money. Oh, but what about those retirements? Those retirements are built into the model. They've already been covered and taken care of. So we know that we have 18 over the next 4 years, and then we assume that new teachers will be brought in at the bachelor's lane step 5. What that means for our principals is that some principals will hire at BA lane or step 1. So that's less than what we project. Others, in order to get, say, for example, a physics teacher, you might have to come in at a master's degree. So that costs more. So we have to pick a place on the salary schedule where we try to hit on average. And this one works well for us.
Is that still around $50,000?
It is $45,470.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We have annual debt certificate payments made from Fund 21. That is our land cash and impact fee fund. We collect a little bit of money each year. That's the fund that's running low. Where this year we had to supplement that with that abatement money or the interest from the feds that we get on our Build America bonds. We only have a few more payments on it because it stops February of 19. So we have February of 18, August of 18, and February of 19. Actually, I wonder if, yeah, that'd be right because August would be the next year. So we have 3 more payments and we're done. So that's really, really good because otherwise that money would have to come out of our operating funds. Ryan?
Roughly how much are those payments?
$330,000.
Could you be more specific?
I could because I think it's $337.70, but I think that includes their fees.
Thank you.
You bet. I'll be glad when those payments are over. So we used to have a lot of money in that fund, but we've been spending it down because we've been making our payments. Remember that those debt certificates, by the way, those were to put the additions on John Shields and John Stewart. We refinanced them in 2009 for 10 years, and so we're almost done paying for those additions. We had a balloon payment at that time that we couldn't afford, so that's why we refinanced and spread it out. This model also assumes that the FY18 budget is an accurate base for projections. If you'll recall, we have gotten a lot better and closer at our expenditures and our budget. And I've given you that sheet before. I didn't bring one tonight, but we've spent, I think, the last couple years, 99.5% of our budget. So I'm feeling like that statement is more true recently than it was, a few years back. So that's a good thing. Let me see, are there any questions on any of the expenditure assumptions before I go into the next 3 slides?
Anyone? Okay.
Okay. So then this shows you if the legislators freeze our property taxes and don't let us access the consumer price index or the inflation for 2 years, what the impact would be. For us, because we levy and then we save our taxes for the next fiscal year, it would not impact us until 2020. The first year, we would lose $762,000. Please remember, though, this is a cumulative effect, and that's why I always encourage the board to levy the full amount in the sense that it's cumulative. So in 2021, that becomes $2.3 million, 2022, $3.9 million, in 2023, $5.5 million. That's money that if they freeze our property taxes, we would not get, and we would have to find a way to balance our budget without it. So I think that's just real important that we know what would happen if.
So, I'm sorry, just to repeat. So you said that's a 2-year freeze, so in 2022, that's the impact when you're still assuming you could increase taxes in 2022, but it had the cumulative effect of 20 and 21, right?
That's right.
Okay.
All right, let's take a peek then. This is the page that you've all been waiting for. This is our 5-year financial projection page that shows you everything. At the top section, first of all, let's look at the columns. The first column is this year's budget. It's in black. Then you move forward 5 years, beginning with fiscal year 19, which is next school year, all the way through school year 2022-23. With that then, let's look at our rows. The first horizontal section is all of our revenue. And you can see that it's basically been projected accordingly. The local increase would be your property taxes with that CPI and new growth. Your state comes down a little bit overall. Your federal goes up a little bit, primarily because of that IDEA and food service money. Not much, just a little bit. Your expenditures is in the next section. Your salary and benefit costs and all others are listed. And then we pay attention then to that surplus deficit line. If you recall, our FY18 budget has a deficit of about $1.5 million. We hope we'll come in better than that, but we'll have to see. I'll show you where we're at in just a moment. Actually, Ryan, why don't you go ahead and ask your question, then we'll go from there.
The salary and benefits, it looks like it's gone up about $240,000 a year, thereabouts. Is that the 5% for?
6% for retirees. You've got 18 people.
Okay, that's what the.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Yep. So your surplus deficit, you can see this year, and then going into next year then, we're looking at a minus $800,000. So at this time last year, we were showing a minus $3 million for next year. It's been reduced because if you'll recall, going into this year, we reduced planned expenditures by a little over $1.5 million. So we worked hard at that. Everybody did. We took a little bit from everyone to try to minimize the pain for any one group or activity or buses or technology. So we're looking at the minus 800,000. Please remember, that's not the whole deficit. Because if you give any increases in salaries, it goes down from there. Trying to think up or down. It gets worse from there, I can tell you that. So, at 345,000, that would be 1%. You'd be looking at 1.1 million, 2%, 3%. You can all do that math. That middle section then later, that's our transfer from Fund 21 to 20. I don't really look at that. Your beginning and ending fund balances are on there. Your fund balances do continue to come down for the first couple years because of the expenditures greater than revenues.
So Julianne, I was trying to figure out, so the beginning fund balance, is that tied to the audit? So that's accrual? So it doesn't have the 1.2 anywhere in here that we just got in, whatever, October?
It would not have the 1.2 in there, but that would show up as cash. So then on your actuals for next year, which you'll roll it forward, it would be in there.
Right.
And the only way it's going to show more is if you get all 4 payments and we have a year with 5 payments.
My thinking is that we'll always be behind 1.2-ish. Yeah.
Exactly.
Built in.
Yeah, you got it. So let me take a pause on this page because this is our important page. This is the page that we pay attention to and make decisions from. What questions do you have on this page?
Would it be hard to restate the bottom line fund balance as a number of months of expend back to the number of days? Because that's the policy, is number of days. My mental calculator doesn't work that way.
Okay. I can do that when I sit back down.
Oh, no, just for future.
For future, I don't know that the software does days, does it? It does revenues?
Can you talk about that last line?
Right, because I believe our fund policy is
45?
days, and we're at .99, which I assume is 30 days.
Yeah,
But
Yeah.
carrying it forward, .82, I don't.
right, it goes lower,
Right.
yeah. Okay. Mike says we can maybe play with that formula and see what we can do to get that so it matches and is more meaningful for you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That'd be great. We're in Excel, so I suppose I can just, yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
Good question. Anything else? Yep, Teresa, go ahead.
Oh, well, I don't really have, I see the numbers, I get the numbers. I guess my questions are mostly on preferences and things, what we might do about it.
Yep.
And I don't know that this is the appropriate discussion for that. That's where we're headed.
It is where we're headed. You're absolutely right. That'll be the discussion on the January board meeting.
Okay.
Dr. Layden and I spent a significant amount of time talking about it today. Additionally, tomorrow, cabinet meets. We'll be talking about it. Wednesday, the entire ad team meets, and we'll be talking about it there. But if you'll recall, the entire ad team began planning for this deficit in August. So we are prepared this year. It's not a surprise. And we've got our ideas. We've prioritized our ideas. We have some discussion now that we kind of know where we're at. What we're going to need from the board at some point in January is how much of this deficit do you want us to attack? And if I remember correctly, then your answer back to me is, well, what does that look like or what does that mean? And so Dr. Layden and I talked today that we can provide you with, because of our prioritization, we can provide you a list of what that's going to look like at 800,000, what that's going to look like at $1 million, and what it's going to look like at $1.X million. So we'll be able to show that to you, and then that will help you to decide how much we want to try and tackle this year, and in addition to that, what kind of raises you might want to, if any, tackle that with as well, depending on the reductions that we present to you in January.
Okay, as well as your recommendation Dr. Layden, as to, like, if we wanted to tackle both, the 1.58 and the 800,000 at once, if we wanted to try to get out ahead of it, recommendations based on what you've heard from, do we want to wait out the state? Do we want to see what happens? Do we
Yeah.
want to go after it all at once, or?
Yeah. That number is cumulative, Teresa, so you would never add those two together.
Okay,
Okay? It's cumulative.
okay.
So the 1.5 is this year.
Right.
And you can't do much right now about it except for try to curtail spending as we go into the spring.
Right.
But I mean, your salaries and benefits, they're set. We know what they are. That makes up that significant portion of your budget. Your buses are bought, your technology is bought. So
Yep.
we're pretty well down the road there. I'll show you in a second where we are. It's that 800,000 that we really need to focus on. The 800 plus any salary increases that the board may need to address.
Okay. And we'll get recommendations on
Right.
Yes.
We'll bring
On all that.
multiple
Yep.
scenarios back.
In January. We want one step at a time.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm just,
You know what the problem is we don't have the meetings with the board meetings with the ad team and the cabinet and the data. It just all doesn't always jive in a row. So that's why we're working this week now that we have the information. And the information is hot off the press.
okay.
So, because it takes Mike and I don't know, what do you think, 10 hours together? By the time you get it in there and then we start checking it, rechecking it, changing, updating. So together, it takes some time to build this model. So, if you turn to the next slide then, you can see the picture. The red line represents our fund balance. You can see that the fund balance continues to go down. You do see that it starts to go back up though in FY19. Who can tell me why it shows that? Like a question.
It's a quiz?
I know. It seemed like a fun thing to
We
do.
have no salaries and we have state property taxes going up.
Right.
Thank you. Ding, 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 ding. Ooh, good. So while it shows it going up, that's not true because as soon as you put some salaries in there, it will go the other direction. So unless if we make reductions that are equivalent to whatever salary increases we give. That might be a strategy that would curtail the slope of the curve.
And I'm not suggesting we would do this or a salary freeze or something similar that we would
That would be-
suggest.
that
I'm
would
not
also-
saying that we're going to
Yeah.
do that, but
Right.
just,
Yeah, but that would also slow the curve.
right.
Yeah, or the slope. And then on the last page of your packet tonight, after the disclaimer, can you switch for me to the Excel file? Thanks. So this is the monthly report that I start doing usually in December, but I thought it might be helpful for you to see it tonight. Thank you. That's perfect. Oops, you know what? Yes, that's right.
It's from here.
Sorry.
Just looks different.
Yep, it is the right tab. Yep, 11:30. We've got them ready to go for the rest of the fiscal year, so we're good. Thank you. Revenues. So this is a report that you have seen before, not too often, but every now and then I share it with you. But we start tracking it monthly to make sure that we're staying on track. Our operating fund revenues, we've got more in right now than we did last year at this time. So that's a good thing. And that has to do with the fact that we've got that first payment, because last year we didn't have it. Other revenues are about right on, 87.9 versus 83%. When you look at expenditures, we're spending a little bit more to our budget this year than last year at this time. So I'm going to dig a little deeper into that and check out the salaries, bennies, because that's probably where it's at, just to see what's going on. Then your others, it's right on, 40.7% versus 39.2. That's right on. When you look at fund balance, you can see, let me point something out so that if you're wondering how that happened, look at your fund balance in the ed fund in 16 and your fund balance in the ed fund in 17.
Is that the transfer?
It is. It's the permanent transfer. Because then look at your fund balance in transportation and your fund balance for 16 and 17 in transportation.
Gotcha.
It went down by the 3 million. Okay, so that's where you see that.
Okay.
Yep. And then if you look right now, it's still early in the fiscal year. And remember, we get our two big paydays in June and September. So right now, we're still showing revenues over expenditures. But remember, we've got 86% of our revenues, but we've only spent 40% of our budget. So each month from this point forward, we just go down, 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 because that's the cycle. It's nothing we're doing right or wrong. It's just simply the cycle. So with that being said, those are the financial projections. I have Mike here if you have any other hard questions. Otherwise, hopefully you've got the information you need in order to make decisions in January with us and our recommendations.
So actually, while there's a deficit, the good news is we were projecting 1.5 for next year.
Yes.
This time last year when you came, it was 1.5 for this year and 1.5 for next year.
Mm-hmm.
And
Or was
so-
it 3 for next year?
It was 3, but then we cut.
3.
Yeah,
I mean,
right. Yeah. So we did,
So
and a
it's
lot of that's
actually-
in the recurring because it carries through.
yes. So, if there's a silver lining.
That's right. If an $800,000 deficit has a silver lining, it's not 1.5. So,
The other
thank
thing
you.
too, I guess I have a question, because I know you guys work with other school districts. I mean, from what I read in the paper, we're not the only ones with deficits. I saw Oswego is cutting quite a bit, and other districts as well, I think. Is that a fair statement that we're in good company?
Yeah, actually, I live in Oswego, and I got the message from the school district for input as to how they should reduce their budget again, because they're running deficits, and they're projected to have more deficits into the future also. Now, every school district is unique, depending on what tier you're in and how much state funding you have, or, you know, where your expenditures have gone. Some do have surpluses, but there are quite a few that have deficits this year.
Mike used to do this job in Oswego, but I don't think they had deficits back then, did they, Mike?
So I have a question. So we're transitioning from Mike coming in to now you, Julianne, presenting everything, yet you guys work together. I guess my bottom line question, is there any savings in the process?
The new program, actually, I'm not even that familiar with what the district pays. What you don't pay any more than you used to pay with the old FPP program. I'm still, Julianne knows that I'm available to her really whenever she emails or calls.
He checks the tax levy also, so throughout the year at major significant points, I do reach out to him. And so we still have that bank of resource hours.
So what's the answer to my question?
No.
No. Okay.
But again, I don't remember what I'm not in charge of.
Charging?
Exactly.
Okay.
And then in some years, we have bond sales and things like that, that we would increase it also, right?
Those are the years that we get this part for
this
free,
year.
though, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think yeah.
Work 'em.
Okay, let me tell you. On years when we do bond sales, we get this part for free because they do it.
You need to work the sales on it.
There you go. I got it. At least we have in the past. And we have a refunding coming up potential in 2019. We skipped a year and then we've got one more. And then after that, it's a long time before we have any other opportunities.
You do this for a bunch of different school districts? Is there any piece of information that you're supplying to a lot of other people that we're not seeing or should be seeing? Something? No.
No, not that I can think of. I think that page on additional assumptions that Julianne went over about there's no change to the tax cap law and there's what the impact of a property tax freeze. I think you need to be cognizant of really those couple of those things there. Because that's not gone away, even though that's definitely a possibility where they would take that CPI and make that a zero, and it depends on how many years they may make that a zero. So we wanted to show you the effect of something like that, but not necessarily build it into the base projections. The TRS passback is another one that we've talked about for at least 5 years now. And the TRS problem has not gone away. Just because they're not passing that back to you doesn't mean that they won't, because if they don't do something about TRS will end up with no money. And that's not going to happen either. So there has to be a solution, but the General Assembly just can't come up with a solution yet. One of those solutions is pass that cost back to the local school district. When or if that will happen, we don't really know. So we're always talking about those things and really keeping our eye on what might affect you, but you really need to be aware of and keep your ear to those things that are changing or happening in Springfield. And those are really the two big ones that are completely really outside of your control that could have a major impact on what your financial projections look like.
Thank you.
And Dr. Layden, you forward those legislative reports to us in our weekly updates.
Especially when it's
as
time,
you get them.
especially when it's time to call somebody.
Yes.
Right. Other questions? Okay. If there are none.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You don't have to stay.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks very much.
School calendar.
We are on item J3, which is the approval of the 2018-2019 school calendar.
Yes, this reflects some of our practices from past years, and also just as a reminder that part of Mid-Valley, there are 5 districts that primarily make up Mid-Valley, and one of the bylaws is they would like us to follow as much of a similar schedule as possible. And so the schedule that you see included or attached, 4 of the 5 Mid-Valley districts pretty much follow this to the day. So as we looked at it and considered it, it's what, like I said, 4 of the 5 are doing, so that is our recommendation. But a few of the highlights or things that may stand out is, again, with the way our district is constituted geographically, we don't have any half-days built in. Some of our surrounding districts will have multiple half-days, and if you'll recall, we just had the waiver from the state to continue 5 more years of having 2 full days rather than a full day and a half day. So that benefits our students for the school improvement days. One of the other things, our semesters are balanced. Our spring break, our holiday break, or winter break also follows that of 4 of the other, or actually all 5 of the districts follow those. Batavia just does have 1 week. They started earlier. They rolled their calendar back because they started final exams before break as an official district move, whereas other districts are still piloting it and working with it as we are. One other thing to note, as Dr. Mumm came in and presented a trimester calendar, EC through 5, what you would see is if that recommendation comes back to the board, or when it comes back to the board, we would then build in 3 dates onto this calendar with those 3 dates reflected. It won't change the calendar, it would just be 3 more icons that you would see to reflect the trimester schedule. We don't have any other than the week of the 22nd to the 24th and November 5 to 9. Those are our only 3-day school weeks. We try to stay away from those because what we have found is when you have 3-day school weeks, families tend to take the extra 2 days and travel, or sometimes we do too as staff members. So the 4-day weeks help for ease of transition and also academic delivery, instructional delivery. What questions do you have for me?
The one that you kind of answered it, but I wanted to see how it's going to affect us potentially in the future, and that was the finals strategy to get them before the winter break.
Right.
I know we were, my words, loose about it this year to allow whoever wanted to put it in there this year. So my, I guess two questions. It sounded like compared to Batavia, they pulled it back a week to start. Right. Is that something potentially we will get to, and at the same time, when will we get everybody to comply with finals?
That's a good question. We are, again, piloting it this year. So what we would do is for the 19-20 school year, after the school day committee has finished their work, that would be a year when in advance with enough time, we talk with the other Mid-Valley districts to let them know if that is something we're going to do. We would have enough time to do that and let the other districts know. And then that would roll back the start time. As an example, for next year, it would be back a week earlier to August 15th to try to balance the semesters. So that's something that we would do for the 1920 school year based on some of the conversation. Because some of the other conversation that we're having along those same lines, for all of you to know, is what is a final exam and when should a final exam be taken? So part of the school day committee that they're looking at, should a final exam be on a set day and then be done with it? Should you just end a unit, end a chapter, and then roll into the next semester? So part of the philosophical question of what a final exam is and when it should be given on year-long questions is still under investigation. So when we determine exactly what a final is and when it's going to be done, that's when we would see an impact possibly to the schedule. So it's a good question.
All right, thank you.
Other questions?
I'm not going down the rabbit hole.
Okay, I was going to say, you had a look on your face. Anyone else?
Okay, if there are no other questions, we're looking for a motion that the Board of Education approves the 2018-2019 school calendar as presented.
So moved.
And I will second that one. And a roll call when you're ready, please.
Mrs. Pavlak?
Aye.
Mr. Rivas?
Aye.
Mrs. Barber?
Aye.
Mrs. Witt?
Aye.
Mr. Carey?
Aye.
Mr. Lawler?
Aye.
Mr. LePayton?
Motion carries 7-0. That concludes new business for tonight. We are moving on now to item K, which is the superintendent and board report.
Yes, our first one, last week, CAC met, Mrs. Barber attended on behalf of the board, and do you want to share a couple of our major topics, or would you like me to start?
Sure, and actually, the main topic was the trimester discussion, and I think they echoed pretty much what the board discussed. And I think it was a good conversation that Mrs. Garland sort of spearheaded, and I think that was the bulk of the conversation time, but they definitely had other topics they touched on as well.
Right, and they didn't, along those lines, Mrs. Barber just shared, that we didn't have an official recommendation from CAC, but as CAC heard the topic, there wasn't a dissenting voice. They were all like, okay, we can see where it makes sense. Just keep us posted and let us know how it may have an impact.
They discussed conferences as well, like we did. Just more of a brainstorming session than a pro or con. But, yeah.
Touch base a little bit on, in the KCN, Dr. Fuchs provided some information on Meredith, how Meredith has been used and what the expenses are. They wanted to know more about that, so we shared that. Mrs. Garland also shared a great deal of detail about the exploratory critical thinking class that is new this year, EC through 5th grade at our elementary schools. That question actually was generated back in August to start the school year from CAC members, and it was perfect timing because this is the year that we've instituted it based on our exploratory expansion. And then the other thing was just communications, and one of the things that they were interested in was when and if board meetings would ever be videocast or live streamed, and we are there, so they were thankful for that. And then there's no December CAC meeting due to the holiday, but we'll start back up in January. One of our other committees, the Hall of Fame committee met, and basically, unfortunately, Gail wasn't able to attend as our Hall of Fame rep. But the two major things we talked about, number one was the online functionality of the submission for nominees. A couple things they had recommendations for, as they heard from other community members who were making recommendations. And so we're going to talk with Tim Wolf and Jen Hodak about updating some of those things. And then the other major topic, of course, was at that meeting, we look at our nominees. We take all of the applications because they're due by December 1st. So that group looks at each of the applications, looks to see if there's anything missing. Do we need any more letters of support, resumes, any other background information? And then we give community members time to submit that. And then in the February meeting, that's when we make our final vote as a committee on the inductees for the 2017-2018 school year. Then the last thing The spelling bee, the schools spelling bee, the respective schools spelling bees are this Wednesday at 1:30. I think we like to tell everybody 1, so that way when we start at 1:30, everybody's there. So technically, it's 1 o'clock then, but we start at 1:30. So that's at each of the schools. I think I sent that information. If you're available to make it to part of it or all of it, that's great. If not, then the district spelling bee, the finals are Thursday, January 11th. I believe that's a 6 o'clock start, so that one is in the evening. We'll send more information out about that as we get back from the holiday and see if you're available for that. So those are a couple upcoming events that we have with CAC, Hall of Fame, and the spelling bee. And I know, Julianne, you had FAC?
I did. We had a FAC last week. At the Finance Advisory Committee, we talked about, we had cut short in November. We ran out of time, and so we finished the levy presentation and the information, which they were supportive of your vote tonight. So no concerns from the FAC. Additionally, I mentioned that I was finalizing the financial projections. I'll go over those with the FAC in January. And then lastly, we did spend some time, I had alluded to earlier, on school fees. And FAC was Thursday night. The board packet was already out, so I couldn't put it on this agenda. So I'll put those school fees on January's agenda, and then that way we'll have them ready for the kindergarten registration, unless if the board decides to make a change and wants to do something different than the FAC's recommendation. We did have a quorum, and the consensus or the vote was to, again, maintain what we've put into place, as it was a 3-year plan before we review and do things. But they did review our last year's revenue to expenditures and make sure that everything is in place. And I can provide you with the data that I provided them in January.
And I apologize, I was unable to make that meeting, so, with no notice, so. That's on me.
That happens. We're good.
But that's all. Thank you.
I had one thing so the Village of Sugar Grove is having a public hearing. It's either Wednesday or Thursday, and I'm not sure which date, on the I-88 interchange. They're having it at Wabansie.
I'll be at that.
You'll be at that. I was going to ask if we had district representation for that, to see how it would impact the district, if at all.
Yep, that's Thursday, I think, from 4 to 7 at Wabansie. I'll be attending that.
Okay.
Well, that reminds me, we have a health insurance meeting on Thursday, Gail.
Yes, I know.
Okay, so Gail and I will be there while Dr. Layton's at the hearing.
Okay.
So that's how I got out of it. Pretty good, huh? Pretty
Yeah.
good.
Anybody else?
Which one's more exciting?
Okay, if there are no other topics, we'll move on to board member requests for topics for future agendas. Anything? All right. So we'll move on then. This is the third opportunity this meeting for public comments. The same rules apply. Are there any public comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the floor to public comments. And we do have an executive session scheduled tonight where there will be no action taken following the session. The executive session is for the following reasons. We'll discuss the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee of the public body or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity. And we'll also be discussing collective negotiating matters between the public body and its employees or their representatives, or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees. So I am looking for a motion for us to go into executive session.
So moved.
Second. And a roll call, please.
Mr. Rivas.
Aye.
Mrs. Farber.
Aye.
Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Mr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. LePayton.
Aye.
Mrs. Pavlak.
Aye. Motion carries 7-0. And because there will be no action taken following the executive session, the recording of tonight's meeting is now concluded. Hello. Should I tell him that? Thank you.